Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? I've lived in enough apartments to know that thin walls are a curse. You hear everything, every late-night TV laugh track, every squeaky headboard, every argument shouted through plaster that was never meant to be soundproof. When I first moved into the new place, I thought that's all it was. Paper-thin walls amplifying the lives of strangers. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized the sounds didn't match the neighbors I actually had. The apartment complex was a 4-story brick building with narrow hallways that always smelled faintly of damp carpet. My unit sat at the far end of the 3rd floor. Across from me lived an older man named Barry, who worked nights and kept to himself. Beside me was a young couple I'd passed in the stairwell a few times. That was it. Quiet tenants. No drama. So when I started hearing scratching at night, faint but steady, I assumed it was rats in the walls. The building was old, and it made sense. But then came the knocking. Not loud, not like someone at the door. This was softer, muffled, like knuckles brushing against wood from inside. The first night it happened, I sat up in bed holding my breath. It was past 2 in the morning, and the knock had come from the wall right by my headboard. 3 slow, deliberate taps, then silence. I remember staring at the wall, half asleep, telling myself it was just pipes or maybe Barry moving something in his apartment. Except Barry wasn't home. His car had been gone from the lot since late afternoon. The next night, it happened again. This time, I pressed my ear against the drywall, my skin crawling. A faint shuffle followed, like something dragging along the narrow cavity between the studs. I knocked back. It was stupid, I know, but something about the sound, so steady, so human, made me want to test it. My knuckles rapped twice, quick, and for a moment, there was nothing. Then, 2 slow knocks back. I froze, staring at the wall like it might open up and spill out whatever was hiding behind it. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, exhaustion dulled the edges of my fear. I convinced myself it was a prank. Old buildings were full of strange acoustics, weren't they? Maybe someone downstairs messing around. I even tried to laugh it off at work, but when I came home, dread clung to me like humidity. That night, I left the lights on in the bedroom. I told myself it was silly. What difference did light make against sound? But somehow, I needed it. The scratching returned around midnight, longer this time, like fingernails dragging on plaster. I clenched my fists under the covers, refusing to move. Then came the voice. It was faint, almost impossible to hear over the hum of my window fan, but unmistakably there. A whisper from inside the wall. "Let me out." The blood drained from my face. My mind scrambled for explanations. Someone in the next unit. A TV left on. Maybe even some drunk kid outside. But no, the voice was too close, too hollow, vibrating directly through the wall into my ear. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and typed a quick search. Apartment noises in walls. What could it be? The results were boring. Rodents, plumbing, settling foundation. Nothing about whispers begging for release. I slept on the couch that night, TV blaring to drown out whatever I didn't want to hear. The next morning I asked Barry casually if he'd heard anything strange in the building. He gave me a tired smile, shaking his head. "Nah, man, this place is quiet as a grave." The way he said it sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. That evening, the couple next door argued loudly, slamming doors, raised voices, the normal chaos of young love. I found myself relieved, real human noise, proof that life went on in this building, that I wasn't losing my mind. But later that night, after the fighting stopped, I heard something else. Crying. Not a woman, not the couple's voices. This was different. A child sobbing, muffled through plaster. The sound came from the same wall where I'd first heard the knocking. Small, broken gasps. The kind of crying you can't fake. I pressed my palms hard against my ears, but it didn't help. The sound leaked through, desperate and wet, echoing in the empty cavity of the walls. And then the crying shifted. It turned into laughter. Not the laughter of a child anymore, but something deeper, distorted, bubbling up like water boiling in a kettle. The shift was so sudden it wrenched my stomach into a knot. I wanted to leave right then, pack my bags and never look back. But it was 3 a.m, and I had nowhere to go. Instead, I sat awake in the living room, every light blazing, listening to the walls breathe. The next day, I went to the landlord. He was a wiry man in his 60s, with yellowed fingernails, and an expression that looked carved into permanent disinterest. "There's something wrong with the walls," I told him. "Something's in there. Scratching, knocking, voices." He gave me a flat look. "Old building. Settles at night." "No, you don't understand. It's not just noise. There's someone in there." At that, something flickered across his face. Not surprise, not confusion. Something closer to recognition. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "I'll have maintenance check for rodents," he said, scribbling a note he didn't even glance at. When I pressed him further, his tone hardened. "Walls are fine. If you don't like it, find another place." That was the end of the conversation. By the time I left his office, dread had calcified into something heavier, the sense that I wasn't the first tenant to complain. That night, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly around town trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. I parked at a 24-hour diner, nursing stale coffee until sunrise. Only when the sun lit up the streets did I gather the nerve to return. But walking into the apartment, I knew instantly something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. My bedroom door stood ajar, though I'd locked it before leaving. Inside, the wall above my bed was different. The plaster had cracked just slightly. Long, jagged fissures ran across it like veins, and in the center, where the paint had chipped away, I saw it, a faint outline, the shape of a handprint, pressed from the inside out. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house felt like a whisper meant only for me, and the silence between those sounds was worse than any noise. I kept seeing the face, or lack of it, floating in the mirror, those empty eyes staring like dark wells that wanted to drag me in. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing more than exhaustion, stress, or some trick of the light. But even as I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom, I found myself avoiding the mirror's center. I brushed my teeth while staring at the tiles instead of my own reflection. My avoidance made me feel ridiculous, but the thought of meeting that blank face again made my chest tighten with dread. By midday, I decided I had to do something about it. I went into the spare room again, the one where I had first seen the faceless thing. The air felt heavier in there, like a room shut up too long, though the window was cracked open. I stood in front of the mirror, heart hammering, trying to summon courage. "Okay," I whispered, my own reflection staring back, pale and tired. Just me, no one else. But as I leaned closer, I noticed it again, the faint warping of the glass, like water rippling. My reflection seemed to breathe just a half second out of sync with me. I took a shaky step backward. Then the glass shivered. Not broke, shivered, like something pressed against it from the other side. I stumbled back, knocking into a box, sending old books scattering to the floor. My eyes were glued to the mirror. Behind my reflection, something was forming. A shadow stretching tall, long arms that bent wrong, head tilting as if it couldn't quite balance on its neck. "No," I muttered, voice barely audible. "No, no, no." I bolted out of the room, slamming the door shut. I didn't open it again all day. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake, listening. At first, the house was quiet, but then came the tapping, a slow, steady rhythm, like fingernails against glass. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the spare room. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, every muscle in my body tense. The tapping grew louder, faster, like impatient fingers drumming on a table. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. I sat up, unable to stand it, straining my ears. That's when I heard it. Movement. Something dragging, scraping across the floorboards, coming closer. The doorknob to my bedroom rattled. I froze. The door shook as if something tried to twist it open from the other side. "No," I whispered again, throat dry. "Please, no." The rattling stopped. I didn't move for what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, though my dreams were filled with warped reflections and faceless figures pressing against glass. The next morning, I was done pretending. I couldn't live in that house with whatever it was. I called in sick to work and drove to the nearest hardware store, buying a heavy tarp, duct tape, and a hammer. When I got back, I went straight into the spare room. The mirror loomed there, taller than me, its surface gleaming faintly despite the dim light. My reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, frightened. "I'm not playing your game," I muttered. I threw the tarp over the mirror, taping it tight, hammering the edges of the wooden frame to secure it against the wall. I didn't want to see the glass again, didn't want to give it a chance. For the rest of the day, the house was quiet, too quiet. I almost convinced myself I'd beaten it, whatever it was. But that night, I woke to the sound of tearing. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized it was real. A slow, deliberate ripping sound, like fabric being peeled apart. My stomach dropped. The tarp. I sat up, heart thudding, staring at my bedroom door. The sound grew louder, closer. Then came the tapping again. But this time, it wasn't from the spare room. It was from the hallway mirror. The full-length one I had walked past 100 times without thought. Tap, tap, tap. I stared at it from my bed, across the dark hallway. My reflection shifted. For a split second, it wasn't me. It was the faceless thing, its head cocked, shoulders too sharp. Then, just as quickly, it was me again, staring, pale and terrified. I realized with a cold jolt of horror. Covering the mirror hadn't stopped it. It had only spread. Every reflective surface in the house was now a door. I tried everything. Over the next 2 days, I smashed mirrors with a hammer until shards littered the floor. I covered windows with blankets, unplugged the TV, even threw out my phone. Anything that could show a reflection. But it didn't matter. Water pooled in the sink and showed me a warped face that wasn't mine. The microwave's faint shine flickered with shadows standing just behind me. Even the black glass of my turned-off laptop caught glimpses of movement when I passed by. I couldn't escape it. And worse, it was growing bolder. I'd see it lingering in reflections, closer each time. First across the room, then just over my shoulder, then right behind me, faceless head leaning near mine, like it was breathing down my neck. One night I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold, heavy. I spun around, but no one was there. The mirror across the room rippled as if water had been disturbed. I was losing my mind. I packed a bag, deciding to leave the house altogether. Motel, friend's place, anywhere else. I just needed out. But when I grabbed my car keys and glanced at the dark window by the door, I froze. My reflection didn't move. It stood still, faceless, watching me. And then it lifted its hand, slowly pressing it to the glass. I dropped the keys. The window shivered, and something began to push through. I've spent years exploring forgotten trails, the kinds that don't make it into guidebooks. Some people chase summits, others chase sunsets. I chased the places maps forgot. That was what led me to the ridgeline north of Bracken County, where the topography twisted like a crumpled sheet of paper. Old survey records showed logging activity there in the 1940s, but no modern trails had ever been cut. It was the kind of terrain that tempted me, the kind that kept its secrets by making sure people got lost before they could bring them home. I parked at the gravel lot just past the trail register and signed my name in neat letters. A habit more than anything, so someone knew I went in and came back out. I wrote solo in the partner field, checked my gear, then locked the car. The first few miles were nothing special. A faint track where logging trucks had once rolled, narrowed into a pair of shallow ruts, and then thinned further until only a suggestion of path remained. I marked my waypoints on GPS, snapped compass bearings, and moved steady. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Even the wind seemed to die as the trees grew dense and crooked. Somewhere around 2 hours in, I found the first footprints. They weren't mine, and they weren't animal. Human, clearly. A single set pressed into the damp clay where rain had collected days before. The strange thing was their direction. They didn't follow the trail but cut across it, pausing here and there before dropping off into the undergrowth. Then, a dozen paces later, they reappeared again, never committing, just weaving in and out of the path like someone circling without purpose. I logged them carefully, each point marked and stored. I told myself it was just habit, but the truth was the prints unsettled me. Too crisp, too recent. The trail narrowed further, then abruptly widened into a scraped patch of earth. Stones had been kicked aside, brush pressed flat, as if someone had tried to clear the way. That's when I realized I wasn't just tracing the prints anymore. I was surrounded by them. Dozens, maybe more, all different shapes and weights. Some deep, some shallow, all overlapping in chaotic patterns that hadn't collapsed yet. Fresh. Too fresh. I froze. My gut told me I'd stumbled into something I wasn't meant to. And then I saw it. The cabin. It leaned against the tree line at the edge of the clearing, roof sloping, door sagging on rusted hinges. At first glance it looked abandoned, the kind of place that hadn't been touched in decades. But the prints led directly to it, crowding the doorway, circling its foundation. Some stopped at the threshold and turned back. Others entered, only to retreat a step or two. It was wrong. A building like that shouldn't have been here. Not this deep, not with no record, not with no road leading in. I stood for a long time, recording coordinates, scribbling compass bearings on my arm. I took every precaution, telling myself it was backup. But deep down, I knew I was stalling, weighing whether curiosity was worth stepping closer. In the end, curiosity won. As I edged forward, the cabin revealed more of its ruin. Boards bowed outward, corners slouched, and the floor inside seemed buckled with rot. Animal tracks were stamped into the dirt at the threshold, and jagged gaps in the planks promised a broken ankle for anyone reckless enough to step inside. I leaned in but didn't cross. 3 steps in, maybe, before the boards gave way. My bones were better off intact. That's when I noticed him. A man leaned against a tree on the far side of the clearing. Plain clothes, plain cap. He'd been standing there the entire time, silent, watching. I raised a hand, tried to sound calm. "Hey," the word echoed strangely in the clearing. He shifted, glanced in my direction, but instead of answering, he bolted. No hesitation, just turned and sprinted into the slope behind him, vanishing between the trees, as if chased. Something inside me screamed not to follow. Not here, not where the ground itself seemed wrong. So I didn't. I backed away, slow, keeping my eyes on the trees until the cabin stood between me and where he'd gone. I marked one last bearing, straight northeast toward a ridge that would link back to a known trail, and started retracing my steps. That's when the GPS began to shift. The breadcrumb trail I'd left behind began to rotate, aligning over itself in ways that didn't make sense. The device flickered, confused. I muttered excuses, satellite interference, canopy cover, human error, anything but what it felt like, that the land was quietly rearranging itself while I walked. It took longer than it should have, but I made it out. My boots hit gravel again. The trail register came into view, and only then did I exhale. I signed out, drove straight to the county sheriff's station, and filed a report. Unmarked structure. Possible trespassers. One man cited. Coordinates attached. The deputy nodded, said he'd pass it along to forestry, maybe send a team. Then he asked if I'd be willing to guide them back in. I hesitated, then said yes. 3 days later, I was back at the trailhead. Only this time, I wasn't alone. The deputy had pulled together a small team, himself, a forestry volunteer familiar with the back ridges, and 2 locals who didn't say much but moved like they belonged in the woods. No introductions, no unnecessary talk. We signed into the register, checked gear, and pushed off the gravel. I led the way. The first miles were the same, but different. Some landmarks matched exactly. The shallow gully, the crooked fence posts. Others had shifted. A stump I remembered clearly sat farther downslope. A gap in the wire fencing had split into 2. None of it was impossible, but it all felt off, like the land itself had been nudged when no one was looking. Nobody commented. The deputy logged coordinates. The volunteer adjusted pace to catch faint shifts in the trail, and the locals disappeared into the brush every so often, reappearing wordless but alert. When we reached the scraped clearing, I stopped. My skin crawled. The overlapping footprints I had seen days earlier were gone. Not faded, erased. The soil was churned, scattered, as though smoothed over by something heavy dragging across it. And the cabin? It wasn't there. Where it had stood, there was only a collapsed mound of ash and charred beams. The exact same rectangle of foundation, but flattened, blackened. No smoke damage in the trees, no burn scars in the soil, no smell of fire, just the silent slump of something that had given up standing. I checked my notes, my GPS, my bearings. Everything matched. This was the place, but the structure had died, or been erased in the days since. The deputy squatted beside the ash and touched it with a gloved hand. Cold. No heat. No sign of recent burn. One of the locals jabbed a stick into the mound, stirred it, shook his head. They exchanged a look that spoke louder than words. "You sure?" the deputy asked quietly. "Yes," I said. The door was there. The roof sagged toward that side. I pointed to empty air, to nothing. He didn't argue, just made notes in his pad, radioed in a brief report, then told us to check the perimeter. That's when I found the boot prints. Ringed around the ash were fresh impressions. Not the dozens I'd seen before, but several distinct tracks. Some wide-soled like work boots. Some narrow light, like someone carrying weight. A short sequence of 6 steps led away into bare clay, then stopped. No 7th step, just ended mid-stride. I called the deputy over. He crouched, studied it, nodded once, then scribbled. No explanation offered. We fanned out, searching for a way anything could have been hauled off. Truck tracks, mule prints, dragged timbers, anything. Nothing. Every trail ended at rock outcrops or dense thickets. The forest folded in on itself like it didn't want to be read. Eventually, the deputy radioed in again, received no real instruction, and said, "We're done here for now." We turned back. Only the return wasn't the same. The faint trail that had let us in had shifted. Instead of angling left toward the ridge, it bent right into new brush. Compass, GPS, paper map. They all showed we were on course, but the ground didn't agree. Twice a landmark arrived too early. Once we walked past what I swore were my own outgoing boot prints, but they didn't line up with the location where I'd left them. The volunteer muttered under his breath, adjusted bearings by inches, and we followed. The locals stayed unnervingly calm, but I caught the way they avoided looking at the ash mound once it vanished behind us. By the time we reached the last leaning fence post, I felt like I'd walked through a dream someone kept rewriting. My gear checks became compulsive. Knife, compass, whistle, map, GPS, spare light, medkit. Habit, not ritual, but it grounded me. We finally broke out onto the logging road, and the air felt lighter, cleaner. Daylight was still with us. The deputy thanked the locals, scribbled their names, shook my hand. "I'll file everything. Send you a copy," he said. I nodded, though I doubted a copy of anything would mean much. At the cars, I paused by my trunk, folding the map, slow. The forest loomed at my back, quiet as stone. When I glanced up, the locals were already gone. Just gone. No goodbye, no sound of departure, like they had been late for something older than us. I drove home. That night I copied my GPS track to a separate drive and locked the map in a drawer marked "Routes Not to Repeat." Still, I couldn't leave it alone. 2 mornings later, I returned to the county office, asked the clerk to check if any permits had been filed for a burn or demolition. She flipped through a binder, tapped at a computer, frowned. Nothing. No record. No file. She took my number, promised to call if something came in. I thanked her, stepped outside, and sat in my car, staring at the ridge. For a long moment, I considered going back, just once more to prove I hadn't imagined it. Instead, I powered on the GPS, set a line that traced the valley roads instead of the ridge, and pressed my hand flat across the screen to block the map. I slid it back into the console, started the car, and merged onto the highway. I never took that ridge road again. But sometimes, when I open a fresh map, I see faint pencil lines where no trail should be, lines that fade if I look too long, and I wonder if the cabin is still out there, standing, burning, or gone, waiting for someone else to step too close. I've always had an eye for strange things, objects that seem to carry some kind of weight, like they had a history stitched into them. Antique stores, flea markets, garage sales, you name it. I'd be there, running my hands over chipped porcelain dolls, brass keys with no locks, and faded photographs of people whose names were long forgotten. My apartment was cluttered with oddities, a gallery of the unwanted. It was on a rainy Saturday when I came across the mask. The shop was in the oldest part of town, wedged between a boarded-up bakery and a dry cleaner that smelled faintly of chemicals. The sign above the door read, "Curios and Relics." The bell above the door gave a dull clang when I stepped inside. The air was stale, like dust and mothballs, with a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. The mask sat on the far shelf, away from the light. At first, I didn't even realize it was a mask. Its surface was a dull, uneven bronze, tarnished and pitted with age. The face it depicted was neither male nor female, just an unsettling blankness, with hollow eyes too deep for glass or resin. The mouth was a slight curve upward, not a smile exactly, but close enough to make me uneasy. When I touched it, the metal was ice cold, colder than the room should have allowed. The shopkeeper shuffled over, a hunched man with watery eyes. "You've got a good eye," he rasped. "That one's special." I asked him where it came from, but he shrugged. "Estate sale. Been sitting here for months. No one else wants it." The price tag was absurdly low, like he wanted it gone. I didn't think twice. I bought it, carried it home wrapped in crinkled newspaper. That night, I hung it on my wall, just above my writing desk. At first it was just a decoration, another oddity. But the longer it stayed, the more I noticed it. I'd be working on my laptop and feel its empty gaze pressing into me. Sometimes I'd glance up and swear its mouth had changed, tilted a fraction higher, like it was mocking me. The first real incident happened 3 nights later. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of faint breathing in my room. My heart hammered as I scanned the shadows. The mask was still on the wall, but the hollow eyes glistened faintly, as if catching a light that wasn't there. I told myself it was just a dream, rolled over and tried to ignore it, but the noises didn't stop. Every night, I'd hear faint footsteps pacing across the wooden floorboards. Though no one else lived in my apartment, my neighbors swore they never heard anything. And then there were the whispers, low, raspy murmurs that grew louder the closer I sat to the desk. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find the mask wasn't where I'd left it. It wasn't on the wall, It was on the desk itself, propped upright like someone had set it down and walked away. My stomach dropped. I lived alone. I almost threw it out right then, but some irrational part of me couldn't let go. Instead, I shoved it into my closet and slammed the door. That night, I dreamed of the mask. In the dream, it wasn't hanging or lying still. It was on someone's face. A tall figure stood in the corner of my bedroom, dressed in shadows, its head cocked unnaturally to the side. The mask's hollow eyes were alive now, gleaming, and the upturned mouth stretched into a full smile. I woke, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. When I opened the closet to reassure myself it was still tucked away, I found the mask hanging on the inside of the door. I don't remember putting it there. The following week spiraled into something I can barely explain. Whenever I left the apartment, I felt like someone followed me. Reflections in shop windows seemed a second too slow, like the figure wearing the mask lagged behind before catching up. I started keeping the curtains closed, but even then, I'd catch glimpses of it in the shine of the microwave door, or the black screen of my TV when it was off, always standing just behind me. The breaking point came when I brought a friend over. Erin had been my best friend since college, one of the few people who didn't think my obsession with antiques was completely insane. She came over with takeout, laughing as she kicked off her shoes. But then she froze in the middle of the living room. "What the hell is that?" she asked, pointing. The mask was back on the wall, even though I hadn't touched it in days. I stammered an explanation, but she cut me off. "It's watching me. I swear it's watching me." She refused to sit near it, her usual chatter gone. She left early, muttering about bad vibes. That night, I sat in front of the mask with a flashlight, determined to prove it was just an object, just metal, just a trick of my imagination. But as the light hit its surface, the shadows of the eye socket seemed to deepen, pulling me in. I leaned closer without meaning to, until my reflection blurred in the polished bronze. For a split second, I didn't see my face. I saw another, longer, thinner, with eyes too black to belong to anyone human. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, throwing the mask's smile into sharper relief. It looked wider now, and I realized something horrifying. The mask wasn't watching me. It was waiting. I jolted awake sometime past midnight, my mouth dry, my body slick with a cold sweat. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional groan of the pipes in the walls. I sat upright, straining my ears. Something had disturbed me. I didn't know what. Then I heard it, a faint scrape, as though nails were dragging along wood. I held my breath. The sound came again, steady, deliberate. It wasn't from the street outside. It was inside. "Hello?" My voice cracked. I grabbed my phone, using the screen's glow as a makeshift flashlight. I padded down the hallway, my socks muffling my steps. The sound grew sharper near the spare bedroom. The door was shut, though I was sure I'd left it slightly ajar earlier. My thumb trembled over the phone screen as I used the light to trace the outline of the doorframe. The scrape stopped. Silence pressed in around me. I slowly reached for the doorknob. It was cold to the touch. I turned it, and the door creaked open. The room was dark except for the spill of moonlight from the window. The walls seemed to press closer, the air heavier, thicker. The second-hand dresser stood there, its surface gleaming faintly. Something was wrong. The drawer I'd shut earlier was open again. Only this time, it wasn't just a crack. It was fully extended, yawning like an open mouth. My gut twisted. I forced myself to step closer, my phone light cutting through the dark. Inside the drawer, the papers were scattered as though someone had rifled through them. On top lay a folded slip of yellowed paper. I picked it up with shaking fingers. Scrawled in rushed handwriting were the words, "Don't let him out." A chill shot down my spine so fast I almost dropped the note. My mind raced. Was this some sick joke left behind by the last tenant? Or had I overlooked it when I first found the drawer open? The air shifted. A whisper slid through the room. Not from outside, not from the hallway, from inside the dresser. I stumbled back, my phone slipping from my grip and clattering to the floor. The light beam spun wildly, catching the edges of the room, until it landed on the dresser's dark opening. From within, something was moving. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare as pale, skeletal fingers curled over the edge of the drawer, long and jointed like broken sticks. They gripped the wood, and slowly, something began to pull itself upward. I backed away, my body colliding with the wall. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out everything else. Then, with a sudden crack, the light on my phone died. The room was swallowed in darkness. I fumbled, searching blindly, until I hit the door frame. My hands found the knob, and I wrenched it open, stumbling into the hallway. I slammed the door shut behind me, pressing all my weight against it. Silence again. No scraping, no whispering, just my ragged breaths. I stood there for what felt like hours, my body trembling. Finally, when I dared to breathe without choking, I crept to the couch in the living room and collapsed, curling up like a child. Sleep never came. I stared into the dark until the sky began to pale. When morning arrived, I told myself I'd imagined it all. Sleep deprivation, anxiety, my mind playing tricks. But the truth was harder to swallow. That dresser had something inside it, and it wanted out. The following days were unbearable. I avoided the spare room completely, shutting the door and keeping it locked. But I could still hear noises at night, soft shifting, wood creaking, the faint rasp of nails dragging across the inside of the drawer. I thought about moving, breaking my lease, getting as far from that apartment as possible. But every time I started packing, I'd hear the sound again, louder this time, like it was mocking me, reminding me I wasn't free. The worst part came on the fourth night. I was in bed, the door to my bedroom firmly locked. Just as I was drifting off, I heard the floorboards in the hallway creak. Slow, heavy, measured. Something was moving outside my door. I sat up, my heart clawing at my ribs. Shadows stretched across the floor beneath the doorframe as though someone, or something, was standing just on the other side. Then came the whisper. Not muffled, not faint, clear, close. Let me in. I covered my ears, rocking back and forth, trying to block it out. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a duffel bag, grabbed my keys, and bolted out of the apartment without looking back. I didn't know where I was going. Hotel, friend's place, anywhere that wasn't here. But as I stepped into the hallway of the building, dragging my bag behind me, I froze. The door to the spare room was open. I hadn't opened it. I knew I hadn't. From where I stood, I could just barely see into the dark room. And in that dark, faintly lit by the morning glow, the dresser's drawer hung open again. Something stood in front of it, tall and thin, its limbs too long, its head bent too low, and it was waiting for me. I should have known better than to let a dare drag me into that tunnel. Blackthorn Creek wasn't famous for much, just an old mill, a boarded-up diner, and the rusting skeleton of a railway bridge that hadn't carried trains in 50 years. But everyone in town knew the story of the tunnel. A single gaping mouth carved into the hillside beyond the tracks. Kids called it the echo chamber, though not for the reasons you'd think. The legend went like this. If you walked inside alone, you'd hear a second set of footsteps. Not quite yours, but not someone else's either. They came a few beats late, like a delayed recording of your every move. People claimed they saw shapes at the edge of their flashlight beams, half-formed silhouettes trying to copy the way they walked. I didn't believe it, or at least I said I didn't. But when my cousin Tyler grinned at me across the bonfire that night, waving a flashlight like a trophy, I knew I was screwed. "Come on," he taunted, his voice already buzzing with too much beer. "One walk to the end and back. That's it. Prove you're not scared." I wanted to tell him no. I really did. There was this knot in my stomach, heavy and sour. The same one I'd felt when my mom warned me never to go near the tracks after dark. She'd said it like a joke, but her eyes hadn't matched her smile. Still, with half the town's bored teenagers sitting around us, waiting for my answer, I felt cornered. So I smirked, tossed my empty can into the fire and said, "Fine, hand me the damn light." We cut across the overgrown lot, dew soaking my sneakers as we pushed through weeds taller than my knees. The tunnel loomed ahead, framed by sagging brickwork choked with ivy. A rusted sign dangled from one chain, "No trespassing." Tyler stayed back, leaning against a tree, clearly thrilled to watch me make a fool of myself. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Damp earth, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like old blood left too long in the sun. I clicked on the flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut a narrow cone through the dark. The tunnel was lined with stone blocks, slick with moss and water stains. Graffiti bled across every surface. Initials, crude drawings, warnings scrawled in red spray paint. "Don't look behind you." At first it was just quiet. My sneakers squeaked on the damp floor, every step echoing back at me. I tried to laugh, tried to prove to myself there was nothing to it. But maybe 20 feet in, something changed. The sound of my footsteps didn't bounce back quite right. The echoes came late, too late. I froze, heart pounding, straining to listen. The tunnel went dead silent. I lifted one foot and set it down slowly. A moment later, something in the dark lifted its foot and set it down too. I spun, sweeping the flashlight across the tunnel mouth. Empty. Nothing but wet stone and the faint mist drifting in from the outside. My chest tightened. I forced a laugh, though it cracked in my throat. "Nice try, Tyler," I called, though my voice shook. "You're not scaring me." Only Tyler wasn't there. I'd left him outside, and I hadn't heard anyone follow me in. I turned back and kept walking, faster this time. My flashlight jittered over the walls, catching flecks of broken glass, rusted bolts, and the curling edge of something I didn't want to touch. But no matter how quick my steps, the other ones followed. Always a half-second late, always perfectly matched. By the time I reached the tunnel's midpoint, I was sweating cold. The ceiling above sagged where bricks had collapsed, letting a drip, drip, drip of water patter into black puddles at my feet. I tried to breathe, tried to remind myself it was just sound bouncing weirdly off the walls, just acoustics, nothing more. Then I made the mistake of stopping. I held my breath. The light trembled in my hand. For 3 long seconds there was silence, and then, step, not mine, not this time. It came from directly behind me. My throat clenched shut. Slowly, like peeling off a bandage, I turned. The beam of my flashlight caught something in the dark. At first it looked like me, my height, my build, even the same hoodie hanging loose from its shoulders. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it became. Its arms were too long, the sleeves dangling past where hands should have been. Its head tilted at a sharp angle, like it didn't quite understand how a neck was supposed to work. And then it moved. Not toward me, not away. It just shifted. A delayed version of what I had done seconds earlier. When I had turned, it had turned. When I had lifted my arm, it had lifted its arm, like a broken reflection, always chasing a beat behind. The flashlight slipped in my sweaty hand. Instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were sunk in cement. And then it smiled, or at least its face stretched into something that looked like a smile, too wide, too stiff, skin splitting in places where the expression didn't fit. That broke me. I bolted, sprinting back toward the tunnel mouth, the light jerking wildly across the walls. Behind me, the footsteps started again, delayed, off rhythm, but following, always following. When I burst out into the night air, Tyler's grin dropped instantly. He must have seen my face because he didn't crack a joke, didn't even laugh. I bent double, gasping, sweat and mist clinging to my skin. "Dude," he muttered, eyes wide. "What the hell happened in there?" I wanted to tell him. I wanted to spill everything I'd seen. But when I turned back toward the tunnel, The entrance yawned open, empty and silent, just an old ruin, and for a second, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, that too long grin, that jerky imitation of my movements, as if it had studied me and was still learning how to wear my skin. By morning, I was pale and wired, but Tyler wasn't about to let it drop. "You're going back," he said, shoving a thermos of coffee at me. "I saw the way you ran out of there. If you don't face it, you'll never shake it." I wanted to punch him. Instead, I drank the coffee and said nothing. By noon, we were back at the tunnel, daylight pouring weakly through the trees. Somehow, the place looked smaller now, harmless, even. The sign clattered against its chain in the breeze, almost comical in its attempt to warn us. We stepped inside together this time. Tyler led, flashlight steady, his footsteps echoing loud and sure. I followed reluctantly, trying not to listen too closely. For the first 100 feet, nothing happened. Just water dripping from the ceiling, the smell of rot and rust. Tyler shot me a smug grin over his shoulder. "See? All in your head." But then we reached the midpoint. The air grew heavy, thick like wet cloth. The sound of our steps changed, softer, muffled, but still echoing. I held my breath. Tyler frowned, and then it started again. Step, step, step. Not ours. We froze. My stomach knotted as I felt the sound ripple through the tunnel, a half-second late, the same rhythm I'd heard before. "Echo," Tyler whispered, though his voice cracked. "Echoes don't walk behind you," I hissed. We turned at the same time. The figure was there again, standing farther back in the dark, just out of reach of the flashlight's beam. Its outline shimmered faintly, like heat rising off pavement, and then, slowly, jerkily, it stepped forward, imitating Tyler this time, his tilt of the head, his shuffle of the feet. Tyler's breath hitched. "Holy shit!" He raised the flashlight, and the thing copied him, lifting an arm, too long, too crooked, mimicking every motion seconds too late. But its face, God, its face, was still mine. "Run!" I whispered. We bolted, tearing back through the tunnel, the sound of footsteps chasing us, delayed but relentless. The beam swung wildly, catching flashes of graffiti, dripping stone, and once, just once, a glimpse of something's shadow moving along the wall beside us, perfectly matched but twisted. We stumbled out into the daylight, lungs on fire. Tyler collapsed onto the grass, gasping, eyes wild. "Did you see it?" he shouted. "Tell me you saw it." I didn't answer. My chest was too tight. My skin felt cold, damp, like the tunnel's air still clung to me. Then Tyler pointed. His hand shook. On the ground, pressed deep into the mud, were footprints. Not 2 sets. 3. Mine, his, and another. Perfectly aligned, perfectly spaced. No drag marks, no weight, just impressions, sharp and clean, as if something had walked with us without ever touching the earth. We didn't speak. We didn't dare. Slowly, carefully, we backed away, never turning our backs on the tunnel. I left town a month later, found a job 2 counties over, got a new apartment, new friends, new everything. But sometimes, when I'm walking home at night, I hear it again. Footsteps, a half-beat late, always just behind me. When my parents told me they were heading out for a week-long trip, leaving me in charge of the family's lakeside cabin, I almost couldn't believe my luck. 17 years old, no rules, no nagging, just me, the cabin, and the lake. I imagined late-night movies with the speakers turned up too loud, eating cereal straight from the box, and maybe even inviting a couple of friends over, though they never got the chance. At first, it was everything I hoped. The air smelled like pine and damp wood, the kind of scent you can only find deep in the wilderness. The lake shimmered like polished glass during the day, and at night, the moon painted silver ripples across its surface. I'd sit on the porch swing with my dog, Rusty, watching the fireflies blink like tiny lanterns over the grass. But then, by the third morning, I noticed the footprints. At first I thought nothing of them, just a few wet impressions across the dock planks. Maybe from a raccoon, maybe from some bird hopping around. But when I bent down and looked closer, my stomach tightened. They were bare human feet. The prints started right at the water's edge, toes dragging as though something heavy had pulled itself out of the lake. They went across the dock, and then stopped. No turnaround, no return prints, just gone. Rusty noticed too. He growled low in his throat whenever we walked past that dock, his fur standing on end. That dog usually barked at everything, squirrels, leaves, even shadows. But this time, he didn't bark. He just stared, ears pinned flat, as if waiting for something to appear. That night, I left a porch light on. My nerves wouldn't let me sleep in the pitch dark. Still, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe some swimmer came late, pulled themselves up the dock, and left another way. Maybe I just didn't notice the prints back. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. By the fifth night, it wasn't just the footprints. It started with noises, soft at first, like dripping water on the porch, though when I checked, nothing was wet. Then heavier sounds, something walking on the dock, boards creaking under weight. Rusty growled again, pacing back and forth at the door. I pressed my ear to the wall, and I swear I heard it. Slow, wet footsteps moving closer and closer to the cabin. I locked everything, doors, windows, even the screen porch. Then I sat up in bed, flashlight clutched in my hand, waiting for the sound to fade. But it didn't fade. It grew louder. At around 2 a.m., I heard the front steps groan, then the unmistakable sound of wet feet squelching across the cabin floorboards. My chest froze. Something was inside. The steps dragged from the living room into the kitchen and then toward the hallway. My bedroom door creaked as a weight pressed against it. The doorknob rattled once, then again, harder this time, as though someone was testing if it was locked. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. Rusty crawled under the bed, whining. Then silence. For nearly 20 minutes I sat frozen, staring at the door, my ears straining. Eventually, exhaustion took me, and against all odds, I fell asleep. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just a dream. Sleep paralysis, maybe. My mind making things up because of the isolation. But then I saw it. A trail of wet footprints across the cabin floor, leading straight to my bedroom door. I woke the next morning to silence that felt unnatural. No birds outside. No hum of the old refrigerator downstairs, not even the groan of the house shifting in its bones. Just silence. My phone was still dead on the nightstand, and when I checked the clock on the wall, the second hand wasn't moving. The batteries had died sometime in the night. It was as though time itself had stopped in this house. I went downstairs, hoping the sense of dread was just sleep deprivation playing tricks on me. The floorboards whined beneath every step, and halfway down I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A footprint. Not a muddy boot print or a smudge from my own sneakers. This was bare, wet, and impossibly long, stretching across the wooden step. My throat tightened. I crouched down, touching it with my fingertip. The wood was damp and cold. I was alone, or at least, I thought I was. By the time I reached the kitchen, my stomach had knotted into something sharp and unmovable. The air smelled sour, like metal left to rust in the rain. Sunlight barely filtered in through the dirty glass window, but the corners of the room looked darker than they should have, as though the shadows had been thickened. On the counter sat the photograph album. I hadn't taken it out. Last night I'd dropped it on the living room coffee table, convinced I'd never touch it again. But there it was, upright and open on the counter. The page displayed a single image, one I didn't remember seeing before. It was the living room, my living room, but not as it was now. The furniture was wrong, older, heavier, and unfamiliar. The curtains in the picture were lace instead of the dusty velvet ones hanging there now, and in the far corner of the image, a girl stood, her face blurred, but her posture stiff and unnatural, like she was staring directly through the camera. I slammed the book shut and shoved it off the counter. It hit the floor with a crack. The silence swallowed the sound too quickly. I told myself I'd leave, that I'd throw the damn keys back on the table and walk away from this house forever, inheritance or not. But when I went to the front door and grabbed the knob, something cold burned my palm. I jerked back. The brass knob had turned black, coated in frost, though the air wasn't cold. And then I heard it. Footsteps overhead. Slow, deliberate, dragging slightly, like bare feet across wood. I froze, staring at the ceiling, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack a rib. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, paused, and then began to descend. I didn't wait. I bolted to the living room, grabbed my bag, and swung toward the back door. But just as I touched the handle, a whisper slid across the air, close enough to feel the breath of it on my ear. "Stay!" I screamed, stumbling forward, crashing through the back door into the yard. The grass felt damp and spongy under my shoes, even though the morning was dry. My vision swam. I sprinted across the yard, out through the crooked gate, and onto the gravel road. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop until the house was a smudge behind me, trees closing in on either side. I should have felt relief, but something followed. Every time I looked back, the house seemed closer, as though distance didn't matter. The road looped back unnaturally, the same fallen tree and the same tire-scarred ditch appearing again and again. My chest clenched with panic. No matter how far I ran, I wasn't leaving. By noon, I collapsed in the grass, gasping, sweat soaking through my shirt. The road stretched endlessly both ways, but the house still sat in the distance, waiting like a patient predator. I tried to call out, just scream for help, for anyone, but the sound died in my throat. Not muted, not choked, just gone, as if something had taken my voice away before it ever left my lungs. That was when I saw her, the girl from the photograph. She stood across the road, pale and narrow, wearing a faded dress that looked decades old. Her hair hung over her face, hiding her features, but I could feel her eyes locked onto me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. The air thickened like glue, holding me in place. She raised one hand, fingers twitching as though beckoning. When I finally managed to drag my body back toward the house, I realized the cruel truth. I wasn't escaping it. I was being pulled back. The house loomed larger and larger with every staggered step, the air growing colder, the silence deeper, until finally I was on the porch again. My hands shook so badly I almost couldn't turn the knob. Inside, the air was darker, heavier, pressing against my skin. The photograph album sat open again on the coffee table, turned to a new page. This time, the picture was of me, sitting exactly where I was, hunched over, terrified. And behind me, in the picture, a hand rested on my shoulder. I spun around, but the room was empty. Or maybe I just couldn't see her. I've always had this bad habit of trusting shortcuts. It's like a compulsion. If the map shows me a thinner gray line that looks quicker than the interstate, I'll take it without hesitation. I tell myself it's about curiosity, but the truth is, I like roads that feel forgotten, roads that belong to no one. That's how I ended up on Miller's Pass one late October evening. The sun had dipped low, spilling orange across the mountains, and I was on my way back from a dull work trip 2 towns over. My phone battery sat at 20%, GPS barely hanging on, when the blue line suggested Miller's Pass, 10 minutes shorter than the highway. 10 minutes saved. At first it was fine. Just another 2-lane mountain road, asphalt cracked but holding together. But 5 miles in, the pavement simply stopped. No construction cones, No warning signs, just blacktop ending in gravel, gravel fading into hard-packed dirt. I should have turned around. But the thought of adding an extra hour to my drive made me press on. My headlights cut into the gathering dusk, throwing pale beams across trees that seemed to lean closer, crowding the path. A mile in, I realized something was wrong. The silence was the first thing. No birds, no insects, no rustle of leaves, nothing but the crunch of my tires. Then came the smell. Damp, metallic, like wet stone after lightning. It clung to the back of my throat. That's when I saw the houses. They appeared suddenly through the trees, like they'd been waiting all along. Small clapboard homes with sagging roofs, porches tilting into weeds. Not ruined, not new, frozen. The kind of place that felt untouched by time. A faint glow pulsed in a few windows, but no smoke rose from chimneys. And then, the people. At first, I thought they were mannequins. They stood in their yards, unmoving, faces turned toward me. Men, women, even children, all dressed in outdated clothes. Flannel shirts, long skirts, suspenders. Their skin was pale, almost gray, and their eyes reflected my headlights in flat, glassy discs. One of them lifted a hand, not waving, but twitching, like a puppet string had been yanked. My stomach flipped. I pressed harder on the gas. The dirt road narrowed, twisting between the clustered houses. More figures appeared, stepping from porches, emerging from shadows. They didn't speak. They just stared, heads tilting, eyes glinting as if catching light from somewhere deep inside. Then came the sound. It didn't rise from throats. It erupted from the air itself, jagged and metallic, like the groan of tearing steel. My rearview mirror shook with the vibration. I slammed my hands over my ears, but the noise drilled straight into my skull. I gunned the engine. Dust billowed behind me, curling around the frozen figures. My chest tightened as the houses thinned, the woods swallowing them again. For a few desperate moments, it felt like I'd left them behind. But in my mirror, the figures were still there, running, not stumbling, not limping, running full tilt, their bodies jerking unnaturally, knees snapping too high, arms flailing at sharp, impossible angles. Their mouths hung open, spilling that awful metallic shriek that seemed to gnaw at the edges of my vision. I floored it, praying the road would connect back to the highway. My phone slipped from the dashboard, landing screen up. The map had gone blank. No route, no roads, no signal, just a pale gray void. The shrieking grew louder. My headlights caught glimpses of figures darting between the trees, keeping pace with me, flickering in and out of sight. My pulse thundered. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The road smoothed under my tires. Pavement again. A green highway sign flashed by. I-74 East, 1 mile. My eyes blurred with relief. I pulled onto the interstate without looking back. But when I finally dared glance at the mirror, just for a second, I saw them. Dozens of pale faces lined along the tree line, standing perfectly still, watching. And in the static hum of my dying phone, I swore I heard that metallic wail. Faint but steady, like a promise. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. How could I? I took a road that doesn't exist and was chased by people who aren't alive. Yeah, that would go over well at the office, so I kept it to myself. But the memory festered. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces. I heard that shriek. For a week, I avoided driving at night. I avoided shortcuts altogether. But one evening, as I sat in my living room trying to drown my nerves with the TV, my phone buzzed. A notification I'd never seen before. Miller's Pass. Route recalculated. The screen glowed, even though I hadn't opened the Maps app. My chest went cold. I powered the phone off, but the screen stayed lit for a second too long, showing me a single word before it went black. Return. That night, I woke to the sound of static. Every device in my house hummed. The TV, the laptop, even my old clock radio. All of them flickered, showing the same thing. A gray dirt road leading into dark trees. My stomach twisted when I realized I was watching from the perspective of something sitting low to the ground, like a passenger seat. I yanked every plug, killed every breaker, but the static kept glowing until dawn. The next day, I drove straight to the library. It took hours of digging through dusty county records, but I found it. Miller's Pass. The road had been real once back in the 1940s. A logging town stood out there, small but thriving, until a collapse in the mine trapped 37 workers inside. Their families lived at the settlement by the pass. When weeks went by with no rescue, they went mad with grief. The record ended there. No explanation. Just a penciled note in the margin. Ashwood Hollow. Condemned, 1949. I wanted to believe it was just history, but when I left the library, my car was waiting with the radio already on, dialed to dead air, and beneath the static, faint but clear, came that metallic wail. That night, I dreamed I was back on the road. The houses loomed, closer this time, their windows glowing. The figures waited in the yards, still as stone, and when I tried to wake up, I couldn't. I could only drive forward, deeper into the pass. When I finally jolted awake, the taste of dirt was in my mouth, gritty and cold. My car keys lay on the nightstand, but they were caked in dust. I don't know how much longer I can ignore it. The pass is calling me back, pulling tighter every day. I know if I go, I won't return. But if I don't, well, last night, I caught my reflection in the darkened TV screen. My eyes glinted back at me, flat, glassy, pale, just like theirs.